Welcome to Leadership Spots Live, Resiliency During Times of Change. I'm Paul Danczyk, Director of Executive Education for the University of Southern California Stoll Price School of Public Policy. Today is the fourth session of a six-part series. Thanks for joining us. We're happy to know that you're finding the series valuable, whether you're joining us live or from the recordings. Thank you for your ongoing feedback. Today, we feature Mira Ringler on creating resilient teams. Next week, Ruben Brock will share insights on rebounding. Before introducing Mira, a few housekeeping items. The session will be recorded and links sent out. Feel free to share these recordings with your networks. Enter all the questions that you have into the chat box. All participants will be muted for the duration of the lecture unless we unmute you. Like last Friday, today's session is designed to be interactive. We have polling questions and one breakout session. The breakout will happen about midway through. When activated, the screen will shift and Zoom will take you into another room. You do not need to do anything. After the allotted time, it will take you back to the main session. You'll work with 3 or 4 others in addressing a posed question. We will share a reminder prompt of the question once you're in your rooms, and maybe another question or two to consider. Please take a moment to introduce yourselves. After discussing the question, identify one person to report back into the chat feature. If you have the ability to do so, share both audio and video. This helps to facilitate a community of learning, and you're guaranteed to meet someone really cool. We have a lot of practitioners and academics joining us through the series. On an aside, in another Zoom meeting earlier this week, one of our colleagues was Zoom bombed. Yes, it's a real thing. If it happens today, we'll immediately remove that person, and if that doesn't work, we'll close the session and record with Mira in a private meeting. That recording will be sent out later today. To be proactive, we have also limited new RSVPs into the series. Now into the main event. Mira is a partner in Flourish Consulting Collective and specializes in maximizing personal competitive advantage through executive coaching and personal development, including some really cool work through international destination trainings. We're glad to have Mira as part of our Exec Ed faculty here at the Price School and look forward to today's conversation. Mira, what's the secret on building resilient teams?
Well, thank you, Paul. I very much appreciate being here, and hello to everyone. I am excited to talk with you about this topic today, as it's so critical anytime, because we're all on teams and building resilience is always important. It's also particularly important now, given what our current situations are, the crisis that's going on, and the constraints maybe that we might be feeling in this time. So the goal of our time together today is really to have us do an opening exercise first to really ground ourselves and to think about one idea or way that we might be able to build resilience in our teams and in ourselves as well. I then do want to go and focus a bit on personal resilience. This has been covered in the last several webinars with great information. And so I want to make sure to tie some of that in and also bring in a few new ideas. Then we will move into the idea of not just building a team of resiliency, but also building a culture within a team in order to create resiliency. That is where we will do a breakout, as Paul mentioned, and then we'll make sure to end with some Q&A questions as they arise. So with that said, I would like to go ahead and get us started. And the first thing I'd like to do is to have us take a moment and to think about this question. And I want to put forward some thoughts and ideas about what this question really means. So we often say this to each other, or we often will say, how are you doing? More than how are you feeling? But the ultimate answer that we're typically giving is what? Good, great, fine, or okay. Even if we aren't feeling good, great, fine, or okay. And so what I'd really like for us to do right now is to take a moment to center ourselves, to think about how are you feeling right now? And this is an opportunity to get present, to get grounded. The thing that's important or the reason for this is we as human beings have this amazing capacity to hold both positive and negative emotions at the same time. So it's absolutely possible for me to be feeling hopeful, but also anxious, or to be feeling engaged, but also overwhelmed. And so this is an important idea that I want us to be thinking about first for ourselves, and then of course we'll be applying it or thinking about it related to the team. So again, let's just take a moment and think about, how are you feeling right now in this moment? And what I'd like you to do is go ahead and enter that into the chat box, because I'd like to see what we are feeling right now. How are people feeling in this moment? So go ahead, and I can't see the chat box, but Paul is going to be sharing with me what he's seeing. So anything and all that you're feeling right now, please share with us.
All right, as you're coming in, things like tired, for example, some pretty good, some anxiety coming into place, a lot of tiredness, stress comes up quite often, eager and tired, so one of the paradoxes that you've been talking about. Some hopeful language also emerging.
Okay. And I do want us to try as much as possible to stay away from the good, great, fine, or okay. So I'm happy that someone's pretty good, but what does that really mean for us? Because there is value in naming the emotion, actually naming it. What else are you seeing, Paul?
Pressured, rested, okay, happy that it's Friday, excited.
Great, good. So we're seeing both positive and negative emotions here. And so what's really important is to remember that emotions are contagious. And they also are an opportunity for us to think about how we are in a certain moment. Mark Brackett, who is a researcher at Yale who works on emotional intelligence concepts, has done research to show that if we're able to tap into our emotions, into our feelings at any one given moment, we're that much more open and receptive to learning and growth. So this is particularly important in this time because we need to be open to learning and growth, given the fact that there is a lot of uncertainty. There is a lot of anxiety. People are feeling overwhelmed and stressed. And so let's make sure that we are able to recognize that, and then as necessary, we can move beyond it, but let's accept it and notice it first. An important concept here is the idea that we can't change what we don't notice. So if we want to tap into our personal self-awareness, we have to first notice how we're feeling in order to be able to do something about it. Now, this is, of course, an important concept for ourselves. I also find that a lot of my clients, I'm an executive coach and I work with a lot of leaders, is that they are doing this with their teams. So this can be a nice grounding activity that can be quite quick that you can do in order to help people ground in a meeting. One of the key concepts here, if you were to do it in a team meeting, is that you don't have to share why you're feeling that way. So there's not a need to justify or minimize why we're feeling a certain way. We're just allowed to feel that way. Now, if we want to follow up with people afterwards because they've said, I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling really stressed, then we certainly can do that, but it's not required in the moment. And it can be a nice way for people to start to really understand how they're feeling. Now, just because sometimes people have a hard time tapping into and naming emotions, here are some that I have found on a feelings list that I found on the internet. And this is just one example. If you go on the internet and put in feelings list, you will see very quickly that there are a lot of these. What I found interesting when I was doing that was that many of these were either English as a second language, which this one was, but there were a lot that were related to children and helping children tap into their emotions and how they're feeling and making sure that we're asking children on a regular basis. Well, why does that stop when we're adults? It's probably even more important for us to be able to name these emotions as we are adults. And so I just want to put that out there, that look at all of these different emotions that you can feel. And I believe the number is that they've determined that there are 3,000 emotions that we can feel. And the typical person can typically name about 10 to 15. So we are really at a deficit here in terms of our ability to look at this. And I would encourage all of you to think about how you're doing that. All right, let's talk a little bit about resilience and what we've learned over the last several webinars, because I want to make sure that we're remembering that first and foremost, resilience is about our own personal ability to combat stress and to help us bounce back and learn from it. And that this is what is so important about our ability and capabilities as human beings, is that we have this ability to take in information, experience it, and then learn from it and do things differently. So that's the concept and idea of resilience and why it's so important. What it isn't is it doesn't mean that we're just powering through or we're just sucking it up. And what's important about this is that we have to let those emotions move. As we've just talked about, emotions need to move, we need to name them, and then we can learn from them. And of course, this is so important now because stress is a real thing. It was a real thing 3 months ago. It's particularly a real thing now. And as Lori Kiley mentioned, this idea of the VUCA world is absolutely critical as we're thinking about resilience. And VUCA, for those of you who weren't on her session, stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I would suggest that all of you are feeling all of those things right now in your life, not just in your work, but in your life. And so our ability to be resilient is something that can help us move through it and also be more fulfilled. So let's talk a little bit about a different frame or way of thinking about resiliency. And Rick Hansen, who is a psychologist, he's also a well-known author on neuroscience, has a book called Resilient. He also has a great website that I would encourage you to go to. He has some podcasts and other great resources. I believe it's rickhansen.net is his website. He's written a book called Resilient, and he talks about resiliency in 3 particular buckets. So the first one being the idea or concept of being with. So this is about mindful awareness. This is something that Alan Weiss talked about in the second in the series that we've had in this webinar series. And it is the idea not only of maybe engaging in some meditation, which is ultimately a wonderful way to do some of this work. It's also, though, about being present and being in the moment and recognizing that that's what we have right now. So again, what we just did, tapping into feelings, is another way of being with wherever we are. And so this is an important concept in resiliency. The next piece is around letting go. How is it possible for us to recognize we have negative emotions, but then also be able to decrease their impact? And some of the ways we can do that is by accepting what is here and what is real and what is now. And Lori Kiley talked about this in the first webinar when she discussed the Harvard Business Review article by Diane Couteau, which talks a lot about how we can improve our resiliency. And one of the pieces is around being very accepting of what is here and what is now. And then finally, this concept or idea of letting in. So how do we recognize and appreciate all that's going on and also have the belief that life is meaningful? That we have the ability to flex and adapt as people. And that these are important concepts And of course, last week when Carol Geffner talked about the importance of creating social connection and what an important piece it is to let in the people we care about in our lives, to allow them to help us create positive experiences and to be there for us. So these are three concepts around resiliency that I want us to take forward. These of course apply to our personal lives and how we're managing ourselves. They absolutely also apply to how we're working and dealing in teams. And that, of course, is where we're going to spend the rest of our time today, is in this idea of how do we build a culture of resilience in our teams. Now, just a couple of thoughts about teams. I know you're all on teams, so you're team members. Many of you are also leading teams. So there are many roles that you're playing within your team. Some of those teams are smaller. Maybe they're just 2 or 3 people. Others have very large teams that might include dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of people that you are creating team culture for. And of course, we're probably on small and large teams because there's a multiple amount of teams that we're on given the different roles that we play. So I just want us to really be aware of all of these roles that we play in these different teams. And let's talk more about that and how our role can help create this culture of resiliency. Marie Kiley on her webinar gave this phrase, organizational resilience is almost more important than a group of resilient employees. And I would say that this is a both and. So I can be very, very resilient myself if I am in teams that don't hold the same ideas, beliefs, they're not being positive, they're not being present, they're not being flexible and adaptive, then that can have a negative impact on me. And so these concepts and ideas of organizational resilience are super important for each and every one of us. So 2 ideas or concepts that I'd like to put forward are the idea of social connection in teams. So Carol talked about this last week for ourselves. This absolutely extends into teams and how we're managing in teams and what we're doing. And the other piece is, how does it impact productivity? So even given this time in our world, we must be productive in our teams and in our work. And so what's happening in our teams to build social connection as well as productivity? Now, I'm going to share some ideas about what I have learned through research and also in speaking with a lot of my clients over the last several weeks and months. I also, though, this is where we are going to make sure that we're tapping into the collective, that we're really asking the community to help us create a list of wonderful strategies and tactics and behaviors, tips, etc., of what is possible here. And the reason this is so important is because we're not in a predictable world right now. We're actually in quite an unpredictable world. And when we're in an unpredictable place, we are in a complex world where we have to create emerging ideas around how do we manage through this complexity. Unfortunately, in the last several months, we have been moved into a place of chaos. So not only are we in a complex world, but now we're straddling this idea of chaos. And it's in chaotic times that we must figure out novel approaches. So best practices maybe don't work anymore. We have to find novel ways to be dealing with what's going on. And that's really what I'm hoping we'll be able to do here together. So I'm going to ask a couple of polling questions. And here's what I'd like to ask you to do. I want you to think about one team that you're on right now. I imagine you're on many, many teams. I want you to think about one team that you're on. And as we ask these questions, I want you to think about that team as you answer these questions. So let's do the first polling question. So the question is, how socially connected are you feeling to your team now compared to January? Again, think of that team. How socially connected are you feeling now versus January? All right, the results are coming in now. And we're seeing, how interesting. It's almost breaking out into thirds. So it looks like about 25% are feeling more connected, 38% about the same, and 38% less connected. All right, so I just want you to recognize that, this isn't, that was a different poll question. We're not going to answer that question. Don't know.
Myra, sometimes that pops up for us, like a.
Oh, but they can't see it. Okay. Okay, great. So, so it looks as if people are in a lot of different places related to then their social connection. And I really want us to explore this because I think it's fascinating that we're so almost in thirds around this. So let's make sure that we're sharing, how are you feeling more connected? What's going on? And if you're feeling less connected, what would make you feel more connected? So, okay, so that's the one question. Now, the second question I want to ask, again, with this same team in mind, is, you guys can pull up the question, how productive is your team now compared to January? So thinking about your productivity as a team, what's going on based on the current situation and where you are? All right, poll results are starting to come in. And it's looking like, for many, it's about the same as before, which is about 50% are saying it's about the same. And then we have 20% saying more productive. Again, I'm going to be very excited and interested to learn how it is that you're finding more productivity now than you were in January. And also about 29% feeling less productive. So it really is skewing more towards either less productive or feeling it's the same. Okay. So I thought what I would do is I would give you a couple of ideas of ways that I'm seeing this play out. And then we could also, we're going to get into the results of the rest. And then we're going to get into groups for you to discuss this on your own. So let's talk a little bit about social connection and some of the things I've been hearing and maybe you've been experiencing as it relates to building a culture of resiliency. So obviously one piece is our need to check in with others. And of course, we've been hearing a lot about virtual happy hours, virtual coffee breaks, virtual lunches, a lot of these opportunities that are being made available. And I do wonder sometimes if we've almost over-indexed on some of these Zoom calls, etc. Of course, we're on one now, but being that we often are finding that they are exhausting. I don't know if other people are finding that, but they can be exhausting. So it is really important that we're doing it and that we're also aware of how often they're happening. Also, what is the forum? So as a team lead, you may be having one team meeting a week, but you might be checking in individually with people, and maybe that's the approach that's working best. I do also want to say here that check-ins don't just need to come from the team lead. So how is it that team members are checking in on one another? And how is that creating more social connection? Whether that's in the form of a text, in the form of an email, a phone call, or a video call of some sort. So the idea of check-ins is certainly a way to ensure social connection. The next is an age-old communication skill that we probably need to really be thoughtful about, and really it is an important piece of how we're managing this right now. And that is, how are we showing up as listeners? Are we listening fully? As Loree Kiley said in her session, are we listening with the fierceness of how we would want to be heard? So are we listening with that same intention and intensity so that we can be really present and have our colleagues feel heard? And so how are you showing this? Are you showing it by not multitasking, whether that's in a video call or on the phone? And are you sharing with people, like if you're taking notes, do you say, I'm actually taking notes, I'm not checking email? Because I've had that happen before with people. And I've had to say, you know, if now's not a good time, we could talk later. And they've said, oh, no, I'm taking notes. It's like, okay, great. Well, maybe we just need to say that out loud so people recognize that. The other piece is, are we asking questions? So the idea of listening is important. A way to really actively listen is to ask questions. So are we being curious? Are we engaged with that person and trying to really be curious about who they are and what they need? And then the final piece I'll put forward here is the power of acknowledgement and appreciation. This is not to be underestimated. Given the current times that we're in, this becomes incredibly relevant. Whether it is a spoken word, it is an email, it is a card that you might send to somebody, the ability to appreciate others, especially in times like this, is particularly important. And I have found a practice that I've been doing is every week I am sending at least 5 postcards or cards out to family and friends as a way just to touch base, to have something fun come in the mail, and to appreciate them as my family and friends. And what's beautiful about the concept of appreciation is that it not only fuels the other person and brings up their emotions, but it ultimately fuels our emotions too, doesn't it? So the idea that, oh, my friend's gonna get that card in the mail actually gives me an opportunity to think about my own personal emotional energy and it's being able to be risen and the positivity that comes with that. So those are some ideas on social connection. I'm sure you have a lot more that we're going to share. All right, so I want to speak briefly as well about the idea of how can we be productive in these times? Because it looks like from the poll that many are either the same productivity or less. So how can we really amp this up during this time? And the reason that this is important is because we as human beings need that meaning. We need to understand that we're doing positive work that's making a difference. So the first is this idea of the vortex of negativity. And it's a concept that comes out of a book by Shirzad Chamine called Positive Intelligence. So like emotional intelligence or intellectual intelligence, he talks about positive intelligence. So how is it that we are upping our game in terms of our positivity and our ability to manage in a more positive way? So the vortex of negativity is one that we are all familiar with. And it gets back to this concept of emotions are contagious. So if you are feeling really positive, maybe confident and happy and engaged and motivated, and you get on a call or a video with your team and everybody else is feeling more negative emotions, what is that going to do? It can frequently drag us down in that vortex of negativity so that we start to have those same emotions or feelings. The opposite can also be very true. So if I'm in a bad mood or in a negative place, and I get on a call or a video with my team, and everybody is laughing and smiling and engaging, is that a way to boost me up? So is it a way for me to actually experience more positive emotions and move up in that vortex into a better place that's more positive and ultimately more productive?
Mara, there's a question that came in. May I toss it out to you?
Please, I'd love it. Let's make it interactive.
Linda's asking about productivity and asks, is productivity the only measure of meaningfulness?
No, absolutely not. And it's a great question. I would say that it's one in a range, in a number of different ways. And actually it ties nicely into next, which is this concept or idea of how do we create environments of safety and trust? So yes, productivity is certainly a component of feeling like we have meaning and are making a difference. It is not the only one. And so certainly our ability to feel safe in our environments and to feel trusted in those environments is super important. And that responsibility lies both on the team leader, first and foremost. It also lies with each member of the team. So how are you as a team member creating safety and trust within your teams? And there are two ways the research bears out that we can do that very effectively. One is through sharing information. So are we sharing as much information as we can? Are we offering updates on a regular basis? You know, one of the things that many of us don't have anymore is passing by somebody's desk and being able to engage in the quick conversation where somebody says, oh, and by the way, let me tell you about what's happening with that. Well, those quick drive-by engagements aren't happening now. So how is it that we are creating and sharing information on a regular basis? The other piece that's very important here and helps create meaning is showing some vulnerability. So how are we sharing with each other when we aren't at our best? Letting people know that we're having a bad day, that we are feeling frustrated or sad or overwhelmed or distracted by whatever is going on in our day. And so those are two ways where we can absolutely build safety and trust. So I hope that answered your question, Linda, but there certainly can go beyond the just the productivity piece. I feel though that that is a place, if it's just a bucket or a marker, that is an important one that people can turn to say, okay, we're making progress, we're making strides. Are there any more questions right now, Paul?
There's some people chiming in to Linda's question about providing some perspective on what it means, including fulfillment, happiness, respect, communication, hopefulness.
Yeah. Great.
Bradford talks about productivity as a matter of a cultural worldview tied to different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
It is defined differently from culture to culture in how team building takes place. And we all create the cultural interaction depending on what culture we bring from our cultures of origin.
Yes, of course. That's an important element too. And be very aware of that the way you were raised is oftentimes reflected in how you show up as a team member, how you show up as a team leader, etc. And it's really important for that awareness. All right, finally, were you going to say something, Paul?
Yeah, Anne just shared an insight, feeling like she can't communicate enough right now.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Anne. And the answer, you can't. And so I would say it's communicate threefold, fourfold, fivefold, which is, and everybody's hearing it at different times because maybe they're distracted, maybe they can't listen to you that time. So not only is it you have to communicate a lot, but you also have to communicate consistently. So the message is consistent, maybe the frequency is consistent. Those are all important elements of our ability to also have the safety and trust piece, is that communication. As it relates to that, on my third point here, again, super important, is how are we, particularly as leaders, but just as even team members in our teams, how are we going back to the bigger picture? Going back to the why are we doing this? Why does this matter? Why does this matter now? And what difference are we making as a team? And so as the leader of different groups, are you continually sharing that we're doing these things and it's having this impact? So really helping people see the impact of what they are doing. And that can ultimately increase productivity, it can increase happiness, it can increase all of those other words that Paul shared in terms of what can be wrapped up in this bucket around productivity. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do next. We're gonna learn and share with our collective and within our community. So here are a couple of things I want you to keep in mind. So we're gonna break you up into groups, as Paul mentioned at the beginning. The groups are gonna probably be 4 to 5 people. I would like for you to introduce yourself. And I'd also like for you to share, are you a team lead? Are you more of a team member? So what role do you play? And my guess is that many of you are gonna say you're playing both. And then maybe share a moment about what size those teams are so that people have a sense of what you're up to. I then would like for you in your groups to share, what are you doing to build resilience in your teams? And I would like for you to look at this from the 2 buckets that we've been talking about. So both from social connection as well as from this bucket around productivity. Now, this could be things you're currently doing. So for those of you who said, we're actually more productive, I mean, we're more socially connected, we're doing really well in these areas, what are you doing? Because other people may need to know. If it is more on the deficit side, what do you believe could help? So just even brainstorm some ideas or thinking around, what is it that could elevate social connection? What could elevate the productivity or happiness or engagement or fulfillment within your groups, in your teams? Just a couple of things to keep in mind here. It's very helpful in these groups that someone rise up and be the lead or the facilitator so that they can get things going to ensure that everybody is able to speak, okay? And I'd also really appreciate it if someone could take notes, because we do want to share these ideas back when we come back in the chat feature. And I'd like to encourage each of you to come, each breakout group, to have at least 2 to 3 ideas, behaviors, concepts, practices, whatever it is, that will be useful. We're going to give you about 8 to 10 minutes to do this. At the 1 minute mark, we're going to let you know you have a minute left. So, and we'll be monitoring that just to see how it goes. But we want to make sure that you have enough time in your groups to both engage with one another and then also to wrap yourself around this question around how are you building resilience in your teams. And I have the ability to kind of float, so I might be in some of your breakout groups as we do this and just listening in and then leaving here and there. So I'll allow you to go and do that now. I believe Daniel will put you into groups. He's also going to put the question up in the screen so that you will have that, or you can feel free to take a picture of this now, which will also give you that information. See you in a bit. Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer. Feel free to ask me a question. Yeah. Or share
Okay, great. My group was actually just two of us who really participated. Myself, I'm from Carson City, Nevada, and I'm a policy analyst at the Nevada legislature. And then also in my group was Dr. Aziza Zamrani from University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And I think she's probably much more used to having some experience online teaching, and that she's probably more experienced with the whole being online than I am. That's been a little bit of a challenge for me, and the biggest kind of poor timing, but we just hired 4 brand new people who started on Monday, March 9th, and then on Friday, March 13th, we're told to go home and work remotely. So that was a little bit of a challenge. Most of the people initially in the first 2 weeks were over communicating in my unit, which was great, but it was a little more challenging. How do you reach out to the new people to bring them in and engage them?
Yeah, great. You know what, that I was sitting in a breakout for a period of time, and that was also the case with one of the women in that breakout. And one of the pieces that I think is really important here is first the individual outreach. So in a team that's virtual with new people, how are you each connecting with one another so that you're building that social connection? You're getting to know one another, maybe almost as human beings, and also about what they're doing. But this is both for you to know that person, but think about if a new person on a team and suddenly they're in this environment that is very different. I also have worked with clients, particularly leaders, but I think that anybody could do this, where I've had leaders create what I call a user manual. So just as when you get a piece of technology or you get an piece of electronics, it says how to use this particular tool. Well, the same is true for us as leaders. So what's my user manual as a leader? How do I like to be communicated with, particularly now? How do I like to make decisions? So how do we ensure that we're all working together? And so this idea or concept of a user manual can also be really, really valuable. So those would be a couple of ideas I have, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Are there other raise their hand questions?
Well, there's some others that have chimed in over the chat. Would you prefer me reading it, or do you want to hear from them?
Well, if we have somebody who raised their hand, I'd love a lifetime question, because we can always share the chat with everybody, right?
I'm not sure if we can do that. We'll check with Daniel to see if we can.
Yeah.
Jennifer Brinkerhoff, I'm wondering if you wanted to share from your group? Or Linda St. Clair?
Sure, I'm happy to share. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we sure can.
Okay, great. So we were the group where we have somebody who's based in Miami right now working with a nonprofit, and I really liked this idea, and Paul, you read it out a little bit earlier about at the beginning of each check-in meeting to share what's new and what's good. Mm-hmm. And so like you were saying, starting with the positive, but it really sets a nice tone where everybody has a chance to chime in.
Yeah.
And then we heard from a faculty member at Cal State Northridge who has been facing a really big challenge because he has research teams that are spread in China. And he had to rush back earlier than planned from doing the research that he was working on in China, and got back to California just in time before travel was restricted. But it meant that he has been enduring this crisis at a much deeper and prolonged level than most of us. And unfortunately, he was just getting to sharing with us how he copes with that when it was time to come back. But what he started to share was how important it is to recognize what elements of the anxiety you can control. Yeah. And so if you're eating too much or not exercising enough, you know, that those are things that you can take in hand, because you have to be able to exercise some control when you're in this kind of context. So that was the gist of what we were able to discuss. Thank you for allowing me to share it.
Terrific. Thank you very much for sharing, and all really, really important concepts. Given that we are getting to the end of our time, I wanted to share with you some ideas, and they're going to build on what you were just sharing with me. So a couple of other things to be thinking about. One is this idea or concept of being explicit and saying it out loud and naming it. And so as that gentleman was sharing, like making sure that on a regular basis, sharing where he is in terms of his own journey, and then asking others where they are. So really calling some of those pieces out can be really, really valuable. We had a chat question about body language and how important body language is, and how do we use that. Now we can see it in video calls, but if we're on phone, we can't. And so again, there is an explicit quality here of maybe just saying, hey, you know what? I can't see your body language. Tell me how you're feeling right now. You know, what's going on for you? And being explicit about some of those questions. Another piece that I have found is particularly important is, are there new protocols that come into play that need to be said out loud? So has decision-making changed? I talked to a client who, she said, suddenly things are moving up 2 levels and they're making decisions up here when we were originally making those decisions. But there was never a communication that said they were getting moved up. So are you being very thoughtful and explicit about the protocols that need to exist now in terms of certain decisions, et cetera? Obviously, the concept of committing to things not having to be perfect, you know, we are living in this VUCA world. We have to be okay with that 80-20 rule, because that's really, really important. And this gets a little bit to the more specifics or tactical pieces that I think can really make or break people just in general, particularly as they might be moving towards burnout. And so these back-to-back meetings, please stop them. Please, they're not helpful to people. And they drain our energy, they drain our productivity, they drain our happiness, our engagement, our motivation, all of it. So how can all of you on teams commit to new protocols around how we are going to do this in this world that we're living in? Another concept that's really, really important is this idea of meetings no longer than 90 minutes. We really cannot keep our attention longer than that. So either take a break and come back, or just finish the meeting in 90 minutes. And then I would also say it's important to limit the mandatory check-ins. These can feel onerous. They might feel micromanaging. Make sure that obviously there are mandatory check-ins that will be required, but how many of them are really needed? I know I'm at the end of my time, and so there was one question very quickly that came in around for leaders who have information that people want, but they don't have the answer and they don't want to set unrealistic expectations around that. This is a real thing. And all I'm going to ask you is to be honest. And it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, I wish I could tell you more, and I can't. If and when I can, I will. And so I think that that has to be just part of how you are able to be a leader in these times. So with that, I just want to say thank you all for your input, your participation, your great ideas, your presence here today. And for those of you listening on, I hope that you'll take away some different ideas and concepts. And thanks very much.